I was determined to rely on my own small resources to repair the damages of the great gale which drove me southward toward the Horn, after I had passed from the Strait of Magellan out into the Pacific. So when I had got back into the strait by way of Coburn Channel, I did not proceed eastward for help at the Sandy Point settlement, but turning again into the northwestward reach of the strait, set to work with my palm and needle at every opportunity, when at anchor and when sailing. It was slow work, but little by little the squaresail on the boom expanded to the dimensions of a serviceable mainsail, with a peak to it and a leech besides. If it was not the best setting sail afloat, it was at least very strongly made, and would stand a hard blow. A ship meeting the spray long afterward reported her as wearing a mainsail of some improved design and patent reefer, but that was not the case. The Spray, for a few days after the storm, enjoyed fine weather, and made fair time through the strait for the distance of 20 miles, which in these days of many adversities I called a long run. The weather, I say, was fine for a few days, but it brought little rest. Care for the safety of my vessel, and even for my own life, was in no wise lessened by the absence of heavy weather. Indeed, the peril was even greater, inasmuch as the savages on comparatively fine days ventured forth on their marauding excursions, and in boisterous weather disappeared from sight, their wretched canoes being frail and undeserving the name of craft at all. This being so, I now enjoyed gales of wind as never before, and the Spray was never long without them during her struggles about Cape Horn. I became in a measure inured to the life, and began to think that one more trip through the strait, if perchance the sloop should be blown off again, would make me the aggressor, and put the Fuegians entirely on the defensive. This feeling was forcibly borne in on me at Snug Bay, where I anchored at grey morning after passing Cape Froward, to find, when broad day appeared, that 2 canoes, which I had eluded by sailing all night, were now entering the same bay stealthily, under the shadow of the high headland. They were well manned, and the savages were well armed with spears and bows. At a shot from my rifle across the bows, both turned aside into a small creek out of range. In danger now of being flanked by the savages in the bush close aboard, I was obliged to hoist the sails, which I had barely lowered, and make across to the opposite side of the strait, a distance of 6 miles. But now I was put to my wit's end as to how I should weigh anchor, for through an accident to the windlass right here I could not budge it. However, I set all sail and filled away, first hauling short by hand. The sloop carried her anchor away as though it was meant to be always towed in this way underfoot, and with it she towed a ton or more of kelp from a reef in the bay, the wind blowing a wholesale breeze. Meanwhile, I worked till blood started from my fingers, and with one eye over my shoulder for savages, I watched at the same time, and sent a bullet whistling whenever I saw a limb or a twig move, for I kept a gun always at hand, and an Indian appearing then within range would have been taken as a declaration of war. As it was, however, my own blood was all that was spilt, and from the trifling accident of sometimes breaking the flesh against a cleat or a pin, which came in the way when I was in haste. Sea cuts in my hands from pulling on hard wet ropes were sometimes painful and often bled freely, but these healed when I finally got away from the strait into fine weather. After clearing Snug Bay, I hauled the sloop to the wind, repaired the windlass, and hove the anchor to the hawse, catted it, and then stretched across to a port of refuge under a high mountain about 6 miles away, and came to in 9 fathoms, close under the face of a perpendicular cliff. Here my own voice answered back, and I named the place Echo Mountain. Seeing dead trees farther along, where the shore was broken, I made a landing for fuel, taking besides my axe a rifle, which on these days I never left far from hand. But I saw no living thing here, except a small spider, which had nested in a dry log that I boated to the sloop. The conduct of this insect interested me now more than anything else around the wild place. In my cabin it met, oddly enough, a spider of its own size and species, that had come all the way from Boston. A very civil little chap too, but mighty spry. Well, the Fuegian threw up its antennae for a fight, but my little Bostonian downed it at once, then broke its legs and pulled them off one by one, so dexterously that in less than 3 minutes from the time the battle began, the Fuegian spider didn't know itself from a fly.